Good afternoon and welcome to the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkshire Community College. My name is Carol Allman Morton. As we begin, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. With gratitude and humility, we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Just a few announcements. Our winter semester of classes will begin on January 22nd, and course information is now available on our website, berkshireolli.org. And if you're here in the room, there's also some catalogs at the back if you didn't already receive it in the mail. And to learn more about other upcoming programs at OLLI at BCC, you can check out our calendar at berkshireolli.org/events. All right, now what we're here for especially. Welcome to the very first Nancy Vale Memorial Talk with Tina Packer. This lecture is supported through the generous philanthropy of Nancy and Michael Vale, whose bequest established the Michael and Nancy Vale Performing Arts Program at OLLI at Berkshire Community College. This endowed fund supports theater-based OLLI programming. We are so grateful for their commitment to the arts and to OLLI. And now I'm going to turn things over to Naomi Spatz to introduce today's speakers and Nancy's daughter, Ivy Vale. Thank you.
I'm delighted to welcome you and that you all are here. We've got about 40 in the room and several hundred on Zoom, and we're thrilled that we have our guests, Tina Packer and Alan Burrows, who are the foremost Shakespeare actors in the Berkshires, in my view, and also what the impact on the community has been enormous. Nancy and I co-hosted the Berkshire Previews for almost 10 years, offering the artistic directors in the Berkshires a platform to present their upcoming season and critics a chance to present their views as well. It was really a thrill and wonderful working, and we all miss her desperately. Nancy's love of theater and OLLI resulted in the generous bequest to OLLI in the form of support for the performing arts. We are delighted that the very first offering will be the most original Tina Packer, but the founder of Shakespeare Company in 1978. And she's accompanied by Alan Burrows, the current artistic director of Shakespeare Company. He will introduce Tina and also interview her. Alan has been with Shakespeare Company on and off for more than 30 years as actor, director, manager, carrying forth the spirit of the founders of Shakespeare. It is befitting that we look at Tina Packer and Shakespeare Company as the underpinning of theater in the Berkshires. The company is unique, not only in its amazing productions, but also in its impact on theater training and education throughout the country. Before I turn the stage over to Alan and Tina, I would like to introduce Nancy's daughter, Ivy. We asked her to say a few words about Nancy's love of theater. And carrying on the family's tradition, Ivy recently completed a film which was shown earlier this year at the Chelsea Film Festival. And her daughter just graduated from college, also with a degree in acting. So the line moves on. Ivy actually is a product of summer stock, where Nancy met her husband. It was Jude Addison and Mickey Rooney. Let's go to the barn, and they did, and they also had a daughter. Tina has agreed to ask questions. As a preview, I was asking people what they wanted to know from her. One playwright said to me, "How does she do it?" The writer said she took a grandchild to a Shakespeare play starring Tina and worried if the child would understand. She understood so well that she became a lifelong lover of Shakespeare. How does she do it? And now let me present Ivy Vale, who will join us from New York on Zoom and will tell us how Nancy did it. Nancy acted, played tennis, wore sequin t-shirts, cooked Armenian dinners, and initiated play readings up to her 90th year. thank you, Ivy. And I think Ivy also has some photo that she wants to show.
Hi, everybody. And thank you, Naomi, and to everyone who's here today. I'm just gonna talk talk briefly about my mom. And yes, I do have a photo. "I'll rest when I'm dead" was my mother's reply to the notion of slowing down. She took big bites out of life, and her passion for the arts was a boundless thread running through it. In 1968, my mom, Nancy, took my 16-year-old cousin, Lori, who was visiting New York for the first time, to see the musical Hair on Broadway. The production contained full frontal nudity and candidly addressed the Vietnam War. Afterwards, Lori gave my mom a copy of the cast album as a thank you, and with it a note saying how the show had opened her eyes to thoughts and feelings she was unable to express, and that it had forever changed her, much to the dismay of her conservative parents. Nancy Vale was a teacher of drama and theater and received her MFA from Northwestern University. She was the recipient of an acting fellowship there and became an assistant to the respected coach and the head of the theater department, Alvina Krause. At Northwestern, Nancy appeared in many leading roles, including Hedda Gabler. And I actually have a photo today. There she is. It's actually two photos of mom as Hedda Gabler. I'm going to leave that up while I continue talking about her. She appeared in regional theater in Chicago and Pennsylvania and was also in several off-Broadway productions. She met my father, Michael Vale, when they were both cast in an off-Broadway production of Chekhov's The Marriage Proposal, ironically. Michael later became well known as TV icon Fred the Baker and synonymous with the line "Time to Make the Donuts." And even though today specifically honors my mother, I can still hear my father saying, "Did you tell them who I am?" Along with Naomi, Nancy began teaching for OLLI when she was in her 80s, teaching courses on George Bernard Shaw and Chekhov, and was proud to be a founding member of the Performing Arts Initiative, which was formed to give members more intense theater experiences, as well as offering workshops, theater parties, and discussion groups. This was a great joy in her life. And further defying ageism, my mom returned to acting in her 80s. And many of you know, and many of you were there in 2018 at age 86. Nancy was thrilled to be cast in a production of the Vagina Monologues. And that was a highlight for me, my family, her friends, my mother, the actor, my mother, the feminist, my mother. So I'm just going to end with this. Nancy was an advocate of the 2-mile rule, which is where you refrain from commenting on a play while you are exiting the theater, because you never know who might hear you. And that was a rule she often took pride in breaking. So thank you to Naomi and OLLI for organizing the first Nancy Vale Memorial Talk. Let's hope there will be more to come. And thank you to everybody.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was terrific. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, we have our 2 stars of the day. So may I ask Dina and Alan to come?
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
I just want to make a point, because I'm going behind that desk in a moment, that you can learn much more about me when I'm standing in front of you and not cut off by a desk. And that is the essence of live theatre. Do you understand what I'm saying? You actually can read from the whole of my body what's happening. And when I go behind the desk, you're only going to get half of my body and half of my breath. So before I sit behind there, I just wanted to make that point. My second point is, I really wish I'd have sat down with Nancy Vale. I used to say, hello, Nancy, but I really wish I'd sat down with her and had a real good talk with her. Yeah. So thank you, Alan.
Are we off camera right now? Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I was just actually saying to Tina how much Zoom doesn't measure up, because when we're in conversation, when we're live, we don't raise our hand when we want to be part of the conversation, right? We just jump in, and that's the thing about Zoom. It's very difficult to have a shared discussion when you're on Zoom, but that's not to say that those of you out in the world who are on Zoom and obviously couldn't be here today. So we welcome your presence in however we can have you. I'm just complaining about having to be on Zoom all the time. You know, it's something that we're happy to leave behind. So thank you for the introduction, Tina and I. Tina and I spend a lot of time with each other debating various things. You may see today in the next hour and 15 minutes or so, or how many, we have an hour and 10 minutes or so. Yeah. We may want to get into debating the finer points, because we both kind of get bored of listening to ourselves speak. I don't get bored of listening to Tina speak, but I don't see a world where she wouldn't get bored of listening to me speak. So thank
Especially
you.
as you do most of the talking these days.
I do most of the talking these days, right? Yeah. And don't think I don't see people glaze over either, right? I really appreciate the introduction as the two foremost Shakespearean actors. And I was like, wait for it. And then you said in Berkshire County. And I was like, wow, well, that is, you know what? If my mother were alive today, I could call her right now. And I also appreciated the title Current Artistic Director. I'm like, okay, I guess the next one will be here any minute now. So, and they'll be the current one. I was an interim artistic director before I became artistic director of a company in Boston called Actors Shakespeare Project. And I was happier than all get out when I was able to leave the term interim behind, right? You do carry a little more authority and weight. I remember Nancy very well. She was always such an effervescent presence, so forthcoming, so friendly, and just a delight to encounter at every turn. I had never seen those photographs of her, but I do know that it was an auspicious beginning for her and her husband to do the marriage proposal. For those of you who don't know Chekhov's Marriage Proposal, it's a very funny play. People think that Chekhov isn't that funny, but yeah, I mean, you can imagine two people falling in love while doing that play together for sure. Okay, so I think the format is I will be the Dick Cavett and
I'm
Tina
the
will be
guest.
the guest. So I will start with a set of questions for Tina. And, I have several questions. We may get through maybe the first one, because that's kind of how conversations tend to take their own various labyrinthian turns. But that's okay. It will all be illuminating, at least to us. If not to you at home a little bit. And we want to leave plenty of time for questions, because as Tina said, the less talking I do, the better.
I did not say that.
What?
I did not say that.
Oh, you didn't say that?
No, I did
Oh,
not
well,
say
that would have
that.
just been
That
my own
was your
interpretation. Yeah.
prediction,
No,
yes.
I was just, yeah, I may have making that leap, because I really do get tired of listening to myself talk. I imagine this mic is hot, but I don't want it to be too hot. But I'm fascinated by origins. I am going to ask you, not yet, but I am going to ask you to tell the woolly mammoth story.
All right.
All right.
Mm.
Just while I'm thinking of it. But I do want to ask, just to going back to the beginning of time. When did you know you were first interested in acting?
In acting,
Yeah.
I can't remember that.
Hmm.
I can't remember it. I think I was always interested in acting. I've always been interested in that, what I think of as the double dichotomy of both being myself and not being myself and it both being myself? Do you, or you're almost watching yourself having this hissy fit or whatever you're having, and knowing I'm having a hissy fit because I want it to have a certain effect. And so I've always been conscious of, and then I always wanted to, I was brought up in a lower middle class home. We used to call it risen working class. In other words, my parents got out of the working classes, but my grandmother was a laundress, literally taking in people's laundry. My grandfather died in the First World War as a foot soldier, and so I came from working class roots. So both my parents were very anxious to get out of the working classes. My mother was a school teacher. My father became first a probation officer, then a writer, which is what he really wanted to be, and then a secondhand bookseller. And he said if I'd have realized how easy it was to sell books, I'd have never done anything else, because it meant you could sit in the bookshop, read all the books, and not, if people came in, you have conversations with them. And anyway, so what was the question?
That's really interesting. It doesn't matter what the question was. It was the origins of your interest in acting, but could that be why you named the company Shakespeare and Company?
Absolutely. I named the company Shakespeare Company because when I was 18 and I take what we call our A levels in England, and I did this dramatic thing so you see, even this, I had a moment of drama. I went to the River Trent, so I lived in Nottingham, which is where the north divides from the south in England. And I took off my school hat and threw it in the river. I was done with school. And then I got on a train and I went off to Paris. I thought I was running away to Paris. And so what was the question again? Yeah.
What first interested you in acting?
Well, then I was in Paris and there was a play on at the Théâtre de Nation, which was The Hostage, Brendan Behan's. And I don't know if any of you know it. It's an incredible play, a Joan Littlewood production, but Brendan Behan. And it's about a British soldier being taken captive by this group of Irish people. And what are they going to do with him? And in a way, they all become friends. But it's very ebullient and bursting. And at the end, they got everybody in the audience, the Théâtre de Nation, thousands of people dancing. And then later on at the Dumagot in Saint-Germain, suddenly the whole cast turned up in the square and carried on dancing. And I thought, wow, if this is what theatre's about, this is where I'm heading for. So it kind of, my part of me that wanted to live the adventurous life got manifested in that cast, out of The Hostage, dancing. And I thought, that's what I want to live with those people.
I didn't realize that you and I haven't known you that long. I've only known you about 38 years, I guess.
It's long enough,
but
Alan.
I didn't realize to this moment that you and I both had the French connection. Right? I didn't realize all the time that you had spent in Paris, because of course I went to school in France for a couple of years, and that's what spurred and deepened my interest in the craft. What's unusual about Tina and I, but not unique, is that as two artistic directors, we're both primarily actors.
Yeah.
At root, we're both actors. That's what keeps us curious and interested about the craft in general, is to come at it through that avenue. The current artistic director of the Globe in England right now is primarily an actor. And that's not normally how things go in terms of people who run theaters. They're often directors, they're often producers.
And an awful lot of them came out of Cambridge University.
Yeah.
So they had the kind of academic bent. Before that, I'm talking about Peter Hall and Trevor Nunn and John Barton. They all came out of Cambridge University, and they used to do what I would think of as amateur theatre in the Marlowe Society, and then they just translated it to the Royal Shakespeare Company, and that became the aesthetic of the Royal Shakespeare Company, as opposed to Joan Littlewood, who was in the East End and was the working class taste of honey. I mean, I don't know how many of you know London at that time, but it really, Joan Littlewood was the force to be reckoned with, and she swore like a trooper, and she was a woman, for Christ's sake. You know, there were no women, and she was alone out there. So for me, and it was totally different. It was all about life and energy, as opposed to the more academic, let's sit round the table and discuss this, of the Cambridge crew. Yeah.
So what keeps you interested in acting, in the craft?
Oh God, my fear is that I won't remember now. So that makes me frightened of acting, because I'm frightened I won't remember my script. And I have to say, Annette Miller, who is doing Golda's Balcony, I don't know if any of you saw it, but she's taking it to Boston now. So we're doing it, what, in February in Boston?
Yeah, we're taking Golda's Balcony to the Emerson Paramount Theater, and right down in the theater district in Boston, and it will run from February 23rd to March 10th. And tickets will go on sale shortly, on Tuesday, actually.
So that Annette could do that and did not have an earpiece telling her what to say next is astounding to me. And I have to take my hat off to her, because I don't know that I'd have had the courage to do it. And she, you know, she talks 1.5 hours, memorizes. So my fear now is that I won't remember it. And I don't know how much, because I haven't tested myself. But it was my love of acting. So I had quite a good career as an actor. I did a couple of television series. I went to a couple of the major reps. I was at the Royal Court, as I was telling. So I did quite a bit of theatre, but what the shift was for me was that I wanted to have more in-depth investigation about what made great acting, and I wanted to be boss, not think, which made me become a director, if I can put it, because as an actor you don't have that much power. You know, in the end, you're deferring to the director, not something Shakespeare had to do. There are no directors in his theatre. There were the actors and the people who owned the theatre, but there were no directors. So it was that, and I was thinking, well, Shakespeare didn't have to defer to a director. I don't really want to defer to a director, but that's our structure. So I'll become a director as well as an actor. Do you understand me? So I could, and that's how my investigation about what makes a good actor a really good actor, is there a way a good actor can get to be an even better actor? That was my investigation then. And that's why I became a director. I then started getting fascinated about what directing meant. And I loved, you know, being able to collaborate with 20 other people on the thing that we were putting up. But the creative impulse has always been the actor's impulse, and then looking about how the truth of the actor can be arranged, that's a bad word, but put on stage so that what's being said is even clearer. And of course, if you're dealing with Shakespeare, he's got these several messages going on. There's several stories in any Shakespeare play going on, and they all begin with P, so it's easy. There's always a political story. So if I can take Midsummer Night's Dream for a moment, the political story in Midsummer Night's Dream is the fight between the sexes. You know, Theseus has overcome Hippolyta in the first frame. Titania and Oberon are not speaking, and in a way, Oberon and Puck are the outsiders, and Titania has got the thing. Then you've got the lovers who are all fighting and got muddled up about who's, you know, attracted to whom and who's. Then you've got the Pyramus and Thisbe, you've got the clouds. So you've got 5 sets of men and women in deadly. So that's the political. Then you've got the poetic. In other words, what's the poetry saying? And it's through the poetic you actually can learn all the layers of the work. Then you've got the philosophy. So what is it that the play's saying philosophically? And obviously in something like Midsummer's, it's if there is not deep collaboration between the feminine and the masculine, the world is always going to be in chaos. And I think that holds really true. I don't think the world's going to come straight until all women get their voices out there and all women have their voices heard. And in every institution, and it's happening, but in every institution, women's and men's voices are counted equally so that we can get the perspective of, you know, of the masculine and the feminine. It's not that we don't have lots of crossover, we do, but you know, as a very broad thing, women are better at relationships because our bodies give off the babies and we've got to learn how to, you know, herd the children, if I can put it like that, and also look after the old people. And the men have got to go out and forage and get the work and get the money. I mean, that's just a generalization. The women now go out and get the money, but then that means it's very difficult to manage the children. And the men more and more are learning to manage the children. So the more the feminine and the masculine can right themselves, it feels to me the more healthy the world is going to be. So there's the political, the poetic, the philosophical, the psychological. So he's always going into what's the motive for anybody doing this. And we were talking about violence growing here, and Shakespeare is the best person to work on violence because there's violence in every single play, even the comedies, there's really a lot of violence. And what causes violence? And again, you know, we've been very influenced by Jim Gilligan, just like the women's voices have been very influenced by Carol Gilligan. But Jim Gilligan is the person who's the psychiatrist who's done a lot of original work on violence. And he says, I learned more from William Shakespeare about violence than the Institute of Psychiatry could ever teach me. And so what the root causes of violence are, which by and large is shame, by the way. I mean, if I've got to give you one word, it's shame that creates violence. Lots of other things do as well, you know, but shame. So you get the psychology in a Shakespeare play, and then you've got the kind of how it affects you personally and how you're juggling with all this. So it's the actor has to own it. It has to be the actor, that human being up there saying it. So you've got a very personal relationship to what it is that's going on, and you've got to play that, even if that character, you're not Lady Macbeth, you don't want to, you know, kill the king or, you know, have the driving force of the lost child or whatever it is that drives Lady M. But you're not that, but you're taking it on. Do you understand me? So you learn to learn with this kind of, I am it and I'm not it. It's very Buddhist, actually. I am it and I'm not it. So you learn to own all this thing and put it into your body and put it into your voice. And so there isn't, for the audience, bad acting, you can see the actor out there. Good acting, you can't tell the difference between the human being who's out there and the person who's saying it. So,
and here I thought the 6 Ps meant proper planning prevents piss poor performance. That's what I've always known the 6 Ps to mean.
Clown.
I'm gonna have to go back and check my diploma.
Performance.
Proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
Okay, proper.
That's what I thought the 6 Ps meant. Just have to check my, you know, it's interesting in today's world, because you were dividing between male and female.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile the specificity of those genders in a non-binary emphasized world?
Well, they've only ever been generalizations, if I can put it like that. we've always had warrior women. And we've always had loving, tender, nurturing men.
Mm.
So, I don't know how to answer that question, because I'm not, I need to appreciate that world, but I'm not of that world. And I don't understand the nuance of that world, and I don't pick up the nuance of the world. So I get myself into a bit of a pickle. And I'm not sure what's politically correct, even though I deal with politics, but not those kind of politics. What do you do about it? Or what do any of you do about it?
I think it's an evolving world, and I think we're on a learning curve. And I think the more open that we stay to the new information that's coming our way, the more we can progress and evolve with it, right? And catch up. I did think it was interesting that you said, and you altered what you said, but I think it's that the truth of the actor can be arranged. I think that's a very specific and excellent way of putting it, because the actor's energy gets arranged quite geographically in various parts of the stage.
Right.
And it gets released and applied and exacted in certain specific situations that create electricity and a dynamism that moves the story forward. You know, you talk about an actor not having the same control or direction that a director does. You know, oftentimes an actor's only control can come in the form of intransigence. Well, I'm not going to do that. You know, whenever I'm directing someone and I put something out there and I say, well, why don't you try it like this? And if the first response is, oh, I don't think I can do that, and then my next response is always, well, I think you can. I think you can. And then that opens up a whole other level of conversation and the storytelling, because really it is about the storytelling at the end of the day, what various people on that stage are creating together. So what was your first encounter with Shakespeare like? Do you remember?
I would say, well, in school, so I went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and we did Shakespeare in our second year. And
That's surprising to me.
No, second term. Sorry, second term.
Yeah, but that it would, you think they would hit you with it right away.
You would think so, but I have to say it set me back quite a lot, because the woman who was teaching it had a very Victorian, which at one point 20 years earlier or 30 years earlier had that was how Shakespeare was performed. So you would take your position on stage, upstage if you were talking a lot, downstage if you were being talked to, and then you'd reverse your direction when it was your turn to talk. And we were taught to pronounce all our words and push our vowels to the front of the voice. So everybody could hear us, but we all came out sounding generically like twerps in my book. But it was kind of an upper class sport, if I can put it like that. And it did me terrible harm, because in fact, we were doing a scene from As You Like It, and I was playing Rosalind, and I'd got Celia, and Celia was saying how tired she was. So I said, well, I think I'd be carrying Celia on my back, and then I'd dump her on the ground, and that's how we'd begin. Oh, absolutely not. Terrible, terrible idea. And so I got hauled over the coals for that, and that shut me up, which is the worst kind of thing. However, when first time I directed As You Like It, that's exactly how they came on. So 30 years later, I got my revenge.
I always say to actors, don't make a choice that you don't want to do 56 times
Yes.
in the course of a run, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if you're gonna, if you're that Celia and you're like, oh yeah, you should throw me on my head in that scene. It's like, yeah, but do you want to be thrown on your head 56
I
times?
didn't
Yeah.
throw on her head. I'm very careful about what happens physically.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I were. So, so your first encounter with Shakespeare, certainly there
Yeah.
must have been some
Yeah, no,
passing.
no. I
Yeah.
think that was my first encounter within the theatre.
Mm,
I'd been to the Royal Shakespeare lots of times. My school took us at least twice a year, if
Mm.
not 3 times a year. And I loved riding on the bus. From Nottingham, it took us 3 hours from my boarding school that I went to. It only took us an hour, but I loved riding on the bus there and riding on the bus back. And that was a huge adventure. And then I loved getting there, and I still in my mind's eye can see Barbara Jefford running across the stage as Kate, making her first entrance as fast as you could. So I had moments like that where I really, they stuck with me. Of course, I didn't appreciate the ending of that Taming of the Shrew, but I appreciated the way in which she was so physical, and I remember that. So there were various. It was really going to the Royal Shakespeare at an early age, you know.
yeah.
That made me unafraid of Shakespeare and think it was fun.
Yeah.
But that was the whole trip. Do you know what I mean? We could flirt with the boys in the bus and throw things and then go to the theater and then come back again, and didn't get back till late at night. And so it was couched in adventure.
It's another connection. You know, my great grandfather was born in Nottingham.
No, you're
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah, I know. We're just catching up. That's all. Just getting to know each other up here. Yeah. No, my
didn't know that.
grandfather was a candy salesman, but his father was born in Nottingham. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
an industrial town in the middle of England.
Yeah.
And,
I went to Nottingham. I was in Derby. I worked at the Derby Playhouse once. I did the Rivals at the Derby Playhouse with Millicent Martin,
wow.
Millie Martin.
How come you were allowed to work in England?
I was there on a visa because we did the Rivals at the Derby Playhouse, and then we brought it back. It was a half English, half American cast.
Oh.
And I joined British Equity to do it. And then we brought it back. And what was interesting, Ian Lindsay, who you may have run
Yes,
across,
yeah.
and then and so we started there, and we as we say in the industry, we killed. We did really well. We would hold for laughs. I played Sir Lucius O'Trigger, and Millicent Martin played Mrs. Malaprop, and then that was my first exposure to a panto as well that Christmas. Had a lovely time over there. We brought it back to the Walnut Street Theater in Philadelphia. And the longest, which is still to this day, the longest running open theater in the States. Right? It started in 1775. And the first play they did there was The Rivals. Right.
Great.
So we brought it back. No, it was terrible.
Oh,
Yeah, the American audiences didn't have a clue of what we were doing. So there'd be where we had been getting laughs and having to hold. Instead, we were waiting, and then we realized we had all this dead space we had to close up. But mainly the English actors were just so excited because the bars stayed open after the show.
yes.
So that's what we talked about upstage. Where are we going tonight? So let me ask you, what was the lightning moment? What was the light bulb moment when because you were in England when you decided to come to the States and start a repertory company, but do you remember the moment? When
Oh,
you were
yeah,
like,
no.
hold
Yeah.
on, I've got an idea. What was that?
Oh, I thought you were telling me to.
Oh, no. No. Where you were saying to yourself, hold on.
That
what's
was
the idea?"
exactly it.
Yeah.
It was at the Royal Shakespeare, and I kept on thinking, there's got to be more than this. Because here I was in the big auspicious place. Do you know what I mean? And
You'd reached a certain
I'd reached
level,
a
yeah.
certain level,
Yeah.
and then I was I was disappointed. It wasn't that the shows didn't get well reviewed, they did. And actually I was understudying Ophelia in the Hamlet, which was the big production that year. I was in Comedy of Errors, I was in Hamlet, Timon of Athens, can't remember all my, Love's Labour's Lost. I was playing the Princess of France. And because I was at, you know, where it was meant to be great Shakespeare, I literally was thinking there has to be more than this. And it did have to do with my desire for experience versus their idea of textual analysis. In other words, you know, I was okay at textual analysis. I don't mean that it befuddled me or anything. It just didn't seem to me that what the dramatic moment was about was and it's why I don't to this day like doing table work. You know, most productions start with 2 or 3 days of everybody sitting around the table. And that's why I said to you out there,
Or
look,
the less a director knows about Shakespeare, the longer you spend at the table.
Yes. And because I think it goes back, and I don't know this, I have no way of proving it, but it goes back to Peter and Trevor and John's experience at Cambridge, where they all sat with their tutors round, you know, they drink sherry and they have tutorials, and it's a talk fest. And it's, you know, it's so I think it goes back to that theatre does table work. I don't know that, because they do it in America just as much as in England. But that, it felt to me the mistake that was being made was being able to get to the intellectual content and nowhere saying the whole body is the vehicle, and what's the energy going on between these actors, and what's the energy between the actors and the audience. And as half the plays are in soliloquy, with the actor actually coming down and saying, you know, to be or not to be, is that the question? You know, that's the question. And asking the audience that if you don't have an open and vulnerable relationship with each other, if you're leading with your head, not with your solar plexus, then I think you're missing half the information. I'm not saying you shouldn't have the intellectual. I'm not denigrating it. I'm just saying if you lead with that and think that that's all there is, what you're picking up in your body, what's actually happening in the physical action is enormously important. And there's more message in there than the intellectual is just part of it. And that's what made me start thinking, I started questioning that and didn't get any. And that's when I started thinking, one, I'm going to become a director. So I parlayed my acting creds into being able to be a director. And I went to LAMDA, the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, and I directed 12 plays, 6 of which were Shakespeare, in 2 years. But I was able, because it was an academy, to start putting my own ideas into practice. And I found out I was right.
So gratifying, so deeply, deeply gratifying when you find out you're right. I know that when I audition people for our seasons, you know, you go in as an actor, you experience this. It's very intimidating to walk into an audition room, especially if you've been called back, because the first round of auditions is usually a casting director and maybe a director sitting there, and then you go in for the callback, and all the money people are lined up, right? So I make sure that when I audition people, that I always sit to the side of the table, to your point, so as not to interrupt the energy flow, the cellular energy exchange, that electric exchange happens between two people, much as the way it happens in an exciting conversation. I remember I auditioned for Sir Peter Hole. I took a course with him once years ago in England, but I did audition for him a few times, and he never looked up. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Whenever you go into audition for Sir Peter Hole, He would walk in the room and he never looked up. He was always looking down at the text that you were auditioning with.
He would say he was listening.
Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah.
He was engaged in like, let's see, do I want the salad with the chicken salad or, yeah, I don't know, I can't decide, French fries. And then, but there was one time he had my resume in front of him on the table and I went to see if he had a current resume and I started to, draw it toward me to see, and his hand just went, just
So he
plunked
did
his
know what
hand.
you were doing.
Yeah, he kind of knew what I was doing. Great. So you've established that you had the idea,
Right.
and then, but let's go back for a second, because I do want to talk about the relationship of the actor to the text.
Yes.
And the relationship and the difference. And maybe you can talk briefly as we get a little granular about the difference between vowels and consonants
Yes.
and how they affect
Yeah.
both the delivery, but also the effect on the actor that
Right.
vowels and consonants have.
Right. Can I do that second? Let me
Mm.
just do, so
I'll
first.
tell the woolly mammoth story
Oh,
too.
all right.
Yeah.
So, for me, breath is the most important
Mm.
thing. So I was taught rib reserve breathing at RADA, which means that you fill your lungs with a lot of breath and then you let it in and out. You organize the in and out. The big difference for me was I met Kristen Linklater, who was following the work of Iris Warren, but Kristen believed in freeing the natural voice. So she said, if you look at a baby breathes, and a baby breathes with the whole of his or her or their body. And does it by itself, it's natural. We need to keep that kind of breath even right up until we die, because that's the breath that allows you to know what you're feeling, to understand what's going on, will send enough energy to your brain to be able to discern that freeing the natural voice is the most important thing. And then everything else starts following. And if you look at Shakespeare's writing, he's writing in the pulse or the heartbeat, pa-pum, 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 breath, pa-pum, 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 breath. So one of the
Let me interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Do you take a breath at the end of the line or the beginning of the line?
Oh, whichever suits you.
This is a company membership debate. Do you breathe at the end of the line or the beginning of the line? Yeah.
But the breath brings a new thought. So you might not realize there's a thought at the end of that line as well as a breath. Are you with me? So that and John Barton taught that. So John Barton, who was part of the RSC crowd, actually was the person who gave me all the information I needed and have elaborated on since and have taught ever since. But then I melded it with Kristen's work, which came from Iris Warren, and Iris was a revolutionary in her time because she lived with a Harley Street psychologist, and he found that Iris, the voice teacher, could get much further with his patients than he could having them sit analyzing on the bench. Do you understand me? So if somebody was stuck, he'd send them off to Iris, and Iris would give them a voice clip, and it would all come flooding out. And this thing of the body trapping the trauma or the event in the body has now been picked up by Bessel van der Kolk and has written The Body Keeps the Score, which he then took up this whole thing and did the workshop, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or something. And out of that, it's gone right back to Iris and the psychiatrist in Harley Street. Do you understand me? So this to me, though, was huge, because it meant if I breathed deeply enough and could follow my natural breath, not do rib reserve breathing, which just helps cut it off, not pushing the vowels to the front of the voice, which is not natural for me, because it's not natural for anybody. If you listen to a baby, the baby uses the whole range of his or her voice. So we're looking at, and so to Alan's point, what is it that the vowels do? The vowels give you the emotional life of the word. What do the consonants do? They give the thought value, because they're cutting it off or guiding it this way. Pa is different from ga. They have an emotion, different emotional reactions. What? They have different qualities that redound on the body. Are you with me? So if you're saying womb, the ooh gives you the big place of the womb, but now we're doing a wa at the beginning. So wa, woman, womb, wonderful, woo, womb. And ma gives you the womb. So you start, the DNA of the language starts coming forward. Do you understand me? And the language can influence you as an actor, both in the consonants and the vowels. And then I started asking, what is the function of theatre? So as I went further and further back, looking at what the function of theatre was, I mean, obviously we all start off with the Greeks and then go on to the Romans and then go on to nothing until we come out with the medieval church and so on. But if you go before the Greeks, what do you get? You get the tribal stories. And obviously, the story I like to tell is the woolly mammoth story. And so we enact it in the workshop, the month-long intensive. And why we enact it is so that they feel it, not so that they just get the intellectual perception. But I'm giving you the intellectual perception now. So if you think about it, why would we tell the story of the woolly mammoth? Well, obviously, I don't know if somebody wants to answer that, or shall I just tell you the answer? Obviously, we're telling the story because that's what the tribe has got to do. They've got to go and fight the woolly mammoth and kill the woolly mammoth. And so that they've got both the meat and the fur in order to get through the winter or the week. So why do we tell the story of it? Well, if you're telling the story of it, it means the people who've never been on the woolly mammoth hunt can get a perception of it. And if you enact the woolly mammoth play, and somebody dresses up as the woolly mammoth and has great horns sticking out, and they charge you, if you've never been on a woolly mammoth hunt, you either run the hell away or you stand your ground and at the right moment throw your spear. You learn how to do it. In other words, theatre is about enacting the dramatic moments of life and having you stand there and actually experience what's going on without your life really being in danger. Are you with me? And I think that's true still today. It can be entertaining, it can be fun, it can be frightening, but you're learning something on a very basic and visceral level, which is why in some ways film and television don't do it. It's got to be theatre that's doing it, because you've got to feel, you've got to experience it. And so if you think about theatre in those terms, that it's actually necessary for our collective psychological health, and that a really good theatre can make you think about things as well as entertaining you, as well as keeping you safe, then, you know, maybe next time, if you've got this desire to kill your father, you will go to a play which talks about killing your father and marrying your mother. And you will not do it, but you will recognize those emotional feelings that are there And you can think, oh, I see it now because you're on the outside of it, but you're on the outside because it's actually. So I talk a lot about theatre, therapy, and theology. Obviously, THE, that's God. But theatre, well, therapy is the healing of God. Theology is the study of God, and where the playhouses were always in the Greek times, was next to the hills and the sky where the gods lived. And theatre is the place where God is found, or the place where God is heard. So you can see that the three things are very closely attached to each other. And when they started gathering, the tribes started because the shift is you go from one tribe, which you're telling the woolly mammoth, now you've got 10 tribes gathering together, becoming Athens or Thebes or wherever. And what does it mean to live with 10 tribes as opposed to your own tribe? And that's where the problems start, because you don't necessarily want to live in 10 tribes, but you're going to because your defense systems demand it. Or you want to create Athens because you want to be able to build a wall all the way around and defend yourself from your enemies. But it also means you've got to get on with the 10 other tribes. And that's when you start getting the Greek theatres, and we're talking about what are the collective stories. And, wanting to kill your father and marry your mother is a time-honored story.
But you bring up a good point about the cross-hatching between theater, theology, and the roots of those words, which the etymology of the language is such that, when you break these words down and cut them in half and take their roots, and it opens up a whole other level of examination on a level that that Shakespeare was going through
Yes,
as well, right? Because
absolutely.
he was such a wordsmith, and he had such a facility with word play that he would be able to expound on not just the words, but the roots of the words,
Yeah.
and the interconnectedness between the roots of different words, and what put them in opposition, and what made them have a commonality with each other. But I do want, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want just to bring it up to the present day.
Yeah,
And that is because you mentioned the function of theater,
yeah,
right? And in this day and age, where so many theaters are closing now after coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
Across the country, there's just if a theater isn't closing, it's definitely struggling. We've been fortunate at Shakespeare and Company to put a high priority on flexibility. We do have a large property that has a lot of external expenses that we're consistently grappling with, because it's a great luxury for us to be on a 32-acre property with 4 active theaters on it. It's very unusual. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival operates on 2 acres, and they have a few theaters, but they have a different level of support and understanding of what they do in that area versus what we do in this area. And it all comes down to the level of the understanding of the community and who's going to show up and be in community with other people through this vehicle that is theater, through this shared experience of being in a room and sharing both, whether it's actively and passively, this sensation of the storytelling and the vibrations that are transferred across the space. But that is challenged right now with all the theaters that are closing. It may be a big shakeout. Maybe we'll get down to the theaters that should have closed. Some people say that. Some theaters should have closed. I find that a rather cold way of looking at it. I think that theater as an art form deserves to be continued. But with all of your study of the roots of theater
Mhm.
and relationships,
Mm.
how do you see the state of the theater today?
Well, I find it frightening. I find it frightening that so many theatres are closing. And because no matter what, television acting and film acting, and then I've done not recently, but I did quite a bit of both, do not put the same demand on the actor as the theatre does. It does not. You can just internally think something on film and the camera will do the work for you and will pick up what you're thinking or feeling. You don't have to make an effort to reach the back wall. So what you're doing in theatre is you're having this emotional feeling, thinking response, and you're expanding it out there. And that's a real art form. Just internally thinking, you can think that quite easily, and the camera will pick it up. And then it's often dependent on what visually you look like and whether you've got enough sex appeal that you will earn the big bucks.
And you know, Nancy Vale had the 2-mile rule. When someone leaves the theater, I want the last thing for them to say is, "Where's my car? Where'd you put the car?" Because that means that experience that they've had in the room has just evaporated as they've left the theater. You know, our goal is to transport people in the room. That's the irony of it, is in the room live to a different world,
Yeah.
to a parallel universe where their vision, their sense of smell, that everything is shifted because they've had the grace to show up and participate in this sense of communal storytelling.
And I have to say, under every Shakespeare play, whether it's a comedy or tragedy or history, are the three big questions. He's always asking the three big, what does it mean to be a human being? Or what does it mean to be alive? How should we collectively act? And what must I as an individual do? Those are the three questions that are under all the plays. And they're his driving force, if I can put it like that. And you know, the big question about what does it mean to be a human being, we're still debating that. But the fact that he's calling to action, a collective action and an individual action. And I just got Jonathan Bates' new book called The Mind of Shakespeare. And I'm on the book about The Tempest. And it's a brilliant analysis of what Shakespeare was doing, was actually revealing the humanist education of Erasmus and why Erasmus got so much of it right, and how Prospero, who doesn't do the things Erasmus is advocating, gets so much of it wrong. And with the result that his brother turns to be violent, Caliban turns violent, Ariel is always frightened of being locked up back in the tree again. It's an incredible analysis of how Erasmus took humanist learning, and that's, you know, how we got our school system is from Erasmus. I don't know if you know that, but, you know, and the Tudors started setting up these schools. But then the whole debate about how you teach in the classroom came up. And it's his analysis of that is just mind-blowing. And I have to tell you, I don't know whether Kevin Coleman, because he used to be a Jesuit, so it might be that he knew this anyway. But Kevin Coleman, our director of education, creates work methods that align with how Erasmus said humanist education should work. And I'm just gobsmacked. I've been underlining it and mean to make and said to Kevin, did you know this? Is this where you're coming from? Or have you just done it instinctively?
He
You know,
intuited it.
he
Knew that he
intuited.
was connecting on a route.
Yeah, but so I don't know if we have to finish now, but I just want to leave you with that Shakespeare's always asking questions. He's not necessarily giving you the answer, because the answer lies over there with the audience. And our job as directors and actors is to get the audience to ask the questions.
Yeah. Why don't we open it up to questions? Speaking of, we have just a few
We
minutes.
go back there.
Oh, yes, sir.
Did you want to say something?
No. So I'm gonna read this one here for y'all.
Okay.
Bring this to the.
Oh, that way they can be heard on the infernal Zoom.
Yeah.
Yes. You conveyed very clearly two separate components of using words, the intellectual, just
Yeah.
interpretive, what the dictionary says.
Yeah.
And then the separate, that the sound will convey
Yeah.
a meaning. And sound eventually goes back to just music, which isn't a word at all.
Yes.
So my question is, has anyone sort of done an experiment with an acting class where you present words in a foreign language, and then through your enunciation and your projection skills, seeing if they can interpret the word?
We are.
Absolutely. I had to act as a wooden duck for a whole month in acting class once as a way of expressing what I needed, what I wanted, what I desired in a non articulated way, right? Much as the body will. A very crude way of creating a dynamic is on stage. A very oversimplified way of putting it is, what do I want from that other person, whether I'm on stage with, and how am I going to get it? And then the audience gets to witness the friction and the result of that tension that those individuals are enacting on stage, as Tina says, in a way that is safe, but nonetheless vibrant.
Yeah.
So I think we have exercises that we do where you try to communicate in a made-up language, and I know that once I leave the room, I have often no desire to go back to English, because people understand me much better when I'm not speaking in an intelligible form.
And we're struggling with this very question right now. We have in our education programs, we're doing an education program in Eilat in southern Israel. And so, but we can't go to Israel because obviously, because everybody is advising against us, they won't insure us. So we can't go, not even Kevin Coleman, who leads that to train. So we've got a problem, which is they've got 5 new, because they've got so many refugees in the education system, and they've never done Shakespeare before. So we've got a real problem about how do we teach the teachers who are going into Israel, of which they have 5 new teachers who have never been into the schools, what going to teach in our methods, and there are 3 that have done our work. How are we going to teach them to teach in Hebrew, right? Fortunately, the 2 main translators of Shakespeare in Hebrew, one of whom's older and one of whom's younger, whose names have escaped me right now. But I know I met them both, and they're terrific, and they will help. But it means we've got this problem of how do we translate the Hebrew words from the English into Hebrew, and all with people who don't know, who've not been following Erasmus's principles of education. So we're going to find out. And I think that's what we'd say is we don't know, and we're going to find out. But and whether it's in Hebrew or whether it's in English, we're going to find out. And of course, Hebrew itself was not spoken except in academic circles for how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, you know. So that itself is a relatively new language. And anyway, that we could go down that path, but it's in our faces right as we speak this.
We have a question on Zoom and our colleague Ray is going to read it out loud for us. Go ahead, Ray.
Hello, this is kind of like a double question from Alice Roth. So Tina, what motivated you to create Shakespeare and Company and why in the Berkshires? But she also wants to know about a book that you referenced called The Mind of Shakespeare.
Yeah, that's it. Jonathan Bates' latest book. Really good book. Really
Okay,
good
good.
book. Yeah. What happened was when I started getting the principles of what I thought the real ingredients to doing Shakespeare was, I went to the Ford Foundation, and because I didn't know it was hard to get into the Ford Foundation, I waltzed in there and I got an appointment and I told them, and they said, yes, we'll support you to do this. I mean, what a miracle, right? And so I had an 11-month project, which was half the year in England and half the year in America, putting the disciplines into practice. So the company really comes out of those disciplines. And then I had a nervous breakdown practically because I was a very strong socialist and I felt the organization should be run on one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote, whatever we were, and that we should make collective decision-making all the time. And what happened was gradually we spent less time practicing the disciplines and more time in meetings deciding what the answer was, until my bosses who were at the O'Neill said, for God's sake, Tina, the Ford Foundation gave you the money, not the whole company. You've got to make some decisions. So I became a fascist at that point. And we were going into New York, and that was all the thing we were debating about, arguing. And I went in and said, all right, we're going to New York. You can come. These are the rules and regulations. If you don't want to follow them, don't come. One person walked, the rest all stayed, and we went into New York. But I learned something, and I learned something about organizational structures. And that's when I started studying organizational structures. And then out of that, I eventually taught at Columbia Business School for 3 years on Shakespeare's lessons in leadership and management. And wrote a book about it with my colleague, John Whitney. And well, Alan runs the company now, and we're a mix of collaboration and fascism. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but you know, and how we came to the Berkshires was a man called Mitch Berenson, who lived next door to my programming office of the Ford Foundation. I thought he was the plumber because he was telling the person who in the kitchen how to do the plumbing. And then Dick Cap said, Mitch Berenson's coming into the meeting. And I thought, what the hell is the plumber coming into the meeting for? And at the end of the meeting, Mitch said to me, I'll help you set up that theater company and we'll do it in the Berkshires. Mitch, it turns out, was a longshoreman who worked with Arthur Miller, and Vinnie was their other partner. They were all on the waterfront fighting the mafia, and Arthur Miller wrote on the waterfront first, not Bud Schulberg, but he wouldn't change who was the baddies and who was the goodies. So they took it away from him and gave it to Bud Schulberg. But Mitch then went up to Westchester County when there was a contract out on his life and started building houses physically. And then suddenly thought, well, I'm cleverer than anybody here. Why don't I build my own house? And got into real estate development and became one of the developers of real estate. So that's how come he could support me to set up a company. But I have to say, in his heart of hearts, he remained a communist.
The Marlon Brando character
Yeah.
in On the Waterfront is based on Mitch.
Do we have another hand in the room? Yeah.
Yes, in the back, sorry, in the back.
So I have a question about when you moved from the Mount
Yeah.
to your new location, your new campus. How did you take that spirit? Did you have like a concern of how do you take a spirit and take it with you to a new place?
I have to say it was a very difficult time for us. I don't know if you were around at that time, but we were 3 years in the law courts. We were deeply attached to the Mount. And it is true that our spirit was in that big theatre there. Alan performed in that big theatre many times. And it was pretty traumatic for us. The courts found that we'd created both organizations and given ourselves five-year leases. And then so it was towards the end, and they really felt they couldn't do what they wanted to do with the house and grounds if we were there. And so what happened was well, I won't go into that. It was clear that we should leave, even though we actually, in a way, won the case. But that what they could offer us was not, we couldn't do it. So then the question was, where would we go to? And North Adams seemed like a real possibility because the state would give us a lot of money if we'd have moved up there. But we wanted to be where our audience knew we were, which is why we moved down the road. And there was enough buildings for us to expand our programming, which we wanted to do. We haven't done all the expansion that I feel we should be doing, but you know, everything takes its time. And now I love Susan Whistler. I think she's absolutely terrific. I love walking through the grounds at the Mount. You know, we're all friends again now. And, you know, but it's given us other problems that we didn't have at the Mount.
Yeah, I think, and some of those problems that come with expanding, obviously, when you reach and you know that you have to pay for that reach. I like walking around the grounds of the Mount because I know that we don't have to keep them maintained and let someone else do it. And she's done a wonderful job over there. Since coming back to Shakespeare Company 8 years ago, I have built 2 outdoor theaters. If you've been to the property, the Roman Garden Theater and then the New Spruce Theater, which is now called the Arthur Waldstein Amphitheater. And that was in the spirit of where we were at the Mount. It doesn't, they're different because we don't perform as late into the night. We're closer to town. And yet on the Arthur Waldstein and both theaters, it's actually very similar to the way they would have performed at the Globe because it's in full daylight at the beginning and then the sun goes down and we bring up some lights. But what that does is it provides a bare exposure between the actor and the audience. There's no hiding behind lights. The audience is actually very much part of the action because they're not in the darkness. So it's an adjustment for actors who've never acted in that format before to go out and to be performing in broad daylight. But they quickly get used to being able to create the story in spite of there not being any kind of difference between the audience being lit and the stage being lit. Yeah.
There was a question down here. Who was it? Was it you?
Was there a hand over here? Yeah, here.
You answered. I was just, well, no. Why Lennox to begin with?
Why?
Why did you move to Lennox? Why did you?
Oh, because Mitch told me to.
So, okay, fair enough.
He said they've got a classical, BSO's over there, Jacob's Pillow's over there, dance, music, well, stick it in the middle. There'll be an audience for you. Literally, I'd never been here in my life.
Yeah.
But I loved it. You know,
So
I feel I have I love the Berkshires. There's a sophisticated audience, and by that I mean an intelligent exchange. There's good restaurants, good dentists, And you can get to New York if you want to, you can get to Boston if you want to, where they have lots of everything. But I like the country life, or the whatever we call it that we're in. I think it's a very special place. And I think the call of fame would have been too strong if we'd have gone to New York or London, which were I think the pull of how the theatre world operates out of fame and glamour and inauthentic things to me that I'm not interested in, and that you get people pissing off because they've got a movie contract. You can't blame them. I've done the same myself, but I'm interested in those actors who really want to learn this stuff and staying with us and keep on turning and keep on having the people who are there deepening the knowledge that we have and going further. And that's easier here than being in New York, or it could have been London. I nearly started it at one point in London.
Interesting.
So we have one more question in the chat, which might be a great last question, unless there's other things you wanted.
Let's assume it is.
Okay, great.
We've actually got a comment and then a question, if that's
Okay, go ahead, Ray.
So the first comment is to Alan, and Barbara says, she loves you as the physician in Julia. Such a treat to recognize you.
Oh, still, you mean the television reference? Oh, yeah, that was
I guess.
Julia. I played on season 2, episode 4 of Julia. I play a really jerky physician.
Okay. Anyway, so then the next question doesn't, it could be for both of you, but Joanne just wants to know, do you have a favorite play?
Well, I guess Winter's Tale, that I'm going to be doing the reading of this summer, is probably my favorite play, but it's usually whichever play I'm working on, I become totally enamored of it. And while I'm immersed in it, I don't, that's the one I'm loving. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like Husbands, whichever one you're well, I don't know if it was like Husbands.
Whatever one you're on currently. I think, gosh, it's a tough one. I would have to say 12th Night. I've directed it a couple times. I've been in it a few times. That one, I just find that it's a gift that keeps on giving, that play, 12th Night. Yeah.
Sorry, I have to wait for the green light. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Applause from
Thank you
online,
both.
applause in the room. We're so
Good.
grateful for your time and the chance to get to know you both a little better. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, Naomi, for your help. All right, everybody, be well. Have a great day.